So, welcome to DOL GULDUR, and this is one of my favourite maps just because it's a very good one for a 3v2, and this is exactly what is in store for this replay in particular. I'm actually on the attacking team, so we'll get to my army in a moment, and the faction that I'm playing I will talk through as the battle goes on, of course. I'll also be talking through all of the factions in this one, to be honest with you, because it's a pretty good chance to do so. Obviously, Gondor, very strong defensively. Guards of Osgiliath. And there are several other units as well, although mostly over here it seems to be the Lothlorien Elves. But here's a lot of Gondor units, obviously just blobbed, because this is a map that's kind of difficult to deploy on when it comes to making a defensive line. Lots of spearmen, of course, lots of infantry, as is pretty standard for Gondor. They're pretty good units for doing this anyway. Some cavalry here. More units over here, so this is a unit of Fountain Guard, and also more spears. There are archers all over the battlefield as well, so if we look up here, there are Citadel archers, so pretty good archer force for Gondor. Moving on to the Lothlorien Elves, a lot of people were requesting that I play as them, and I did have a battle as them, but it wasn't particularly fantastic, so I couldn't really show it. So I will be talking about Lothlorien a little bit more in this battle as well. Galadrim Mounted Company, decent shot cav. They don't have hit points, but they can still run a lot of interference in a siege battle like this one, particularly one where you can get a lot of downhill charges. A ballista, it's an interesting choice. On Dol Guldur I'd be more tempted to go for a catapult for obvious reasons. Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen, Woodland Warriors. The Sylvan Elves, well, I'm going to keep calling them Sylvan Elves by accident because that's what they've always been before this, but they do have a lot of good mid-tier stuff now, and the Woodland Warriors count as that. Sylvan Staff Masters, terrible armour, so not good against range, but very good in melee at holding the line for quite a long time with their very high defence. Sylvan Silver Spears, and several units of Sylvan Heavy Spearmen, of course, and some Elder Council over here, so he's got some javelins, and of course he's got more archers up on the wall, as is customary. I think those are Woodland Sentinels of the Woodland Realms. And then up here we have these Sylvan Heavy Archers, basically all of the elites, Veterans of Osgiliath, Sons of Argonath, and Galadrim Veteran Warriors. So now we'll move on to my faction, and the one I'm going to be talking about, at least, well, this is interesting. The map is not letting me do the double click thing. I really need to get myself a better camera tool now that I'm doing this a little bit more often. Nonetheless, I'm playing as Umbar, and I have several units of Corsair Savages and also several units of Belagir Halberdiers. Now, these two units in particular are one of the reasons why I really like Umbar. Put together, they're very good at dealing with armoured units. The Belagir Halberds offer the defensiveness and the survivability, and the Corsair Savages offer a bit more damage, even though they're quite fragile. Of course, they don't wear any armour at all. Corsair Blackguards, very good javelin unit. Then I've got several units of Belagir Archers, and back down here I have a catapult, of course. Several units of Abrazanim, well, a couple of units of Abrazanim, and then a couple of units of the Castamere units. Moving over here, we have Dale. Now, the Lake Town infantry are not great, as I have learned recently, but they will still at least offer a bit of numbers to the Dalian army. It's interesting that I'm laying siege to Dol Guldur with two armies that are traditionally quite ranged focused. Obviously Dale, no explanation needs to be made there. Barding Herd, Dale Swordmasters. If we look over here, there are several units of archers down here, which he's going to send over to me. Which again, there is one area on this map where you can really make use of ranged units as the attackers. Dalian Marksmen and Dale Dragon Slayers both very good, and the other faction that is helping us lay siege is the Woodland Realms, which is a pretty bold move to play as the elves on the attack, but the Woodland Realms can make it work, particularly in this situation where the defenders are kind of stuck with what they can do. So obviously there's lots of Lang, lots of Ek, some Elder Palace Guard, and then primarily archers, Light Elven Archers, Royal Guard, Elder Council as well, so certainly a quality approach to this army, but that's to be expected. So, without further ado, let us begin. Now obviously on Dol Guldur, this gate here is kind of like the central gate. It's the one that the defenders are always going to defend the most. So anyway, as I was saying, this is the gate that's going to be the primary source of the defence, mainly because it's easiest to get to the town centre from here, and also it's going to be the place where the attackers can mount the most comprehensive attack. Obviously I'm sending up some Belagir archers to stand on this hill over here, which will allow me to shoot down into here. Now I will not have the skirmish advantage against the Lothlorien Elves. It's one of their primary strengths, of course, and particularly against a unit like Corsair Savages, they're going to get a lot of kills. Having said that, it's still a pretty favourable thing that I was the army that deployed here, because Umbar have got a lot of heavy duty infantry which can make an attack like this. If it doesn't succeed, it will at least last a long time, and buy time for the other avenues of attack to have a bit more success. Now over here, of course, a bit less of a defence over here. There's still Guards of Osgiliath and Gondor Spearmen, certainly, and that's not the easiest thing to get through. But Dale has got a lot of range and a lot of decent melee units that they can push through this eventually. The same can be said for the Woodland Realms, although they do have to be very careful with their numbers. You can also put them up on this hill over here and shoot over. So that's a pretty nice area, but this over here, it's a little bit less likely you'll see enemy archers on this hill, purely because this is less of a defensive area. This is probably the first gate that the defenders are going to abandon, mainly because you have a slight little hill here, which also allows you to form up a nice defensive position. Dol Guldur is really an exercise for the defenders in how would you like to defend. Do you want to really defend all the outer gates, or do you want to have several points you can fall back to? And the second of those options is certainly the better way to do things, I think. So the ballista is coming up here. Now if we look over here, we can see that I'm pushing the ram up. You know, just the ram at first. Unfortunately for me, however, he noticed that this was isolated and he's sending out a unit of Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen. Now of course Sylvan Heavy Swordsmen will quite easily deal with Corsair Savages in melee. A bit of a frame drop there as I was zooming in and out. Now the bad thing for me is that the Sylvan Elves don't have a lot of armour, so a lot of my units won't actually be able to dish out their damage as effectively or as efficiently as I would like. Having said that, this does open up the way for my slightly less stellar archers usually. The Balagir archers are okay, there's nothing wrong with them per se, but they're certainly not as good as, you know, several of the enemy archers. The Gondor Citadel archers and the Sylvan Heavies are much better, but I am able to now shoot into the flank of this unit which is charged out, also sending out a couple of my siege towers. So this is really where the first battle took place, and this is going to do a lot of damage because this is really the problem that the Lothlorien elves have. Their lack of armour means that, you know, they do have a kind of curious strength against units that are effective against armour, but unfortunately this leaves them open to a lot more in terms of skirmish fire. You know, they can often win the skirmish fight because of how good their own archers are, but in this situation it's more of a problem. You know, and also the other problem with the Sylvan Elves in this sort of situation, which is a little bit of a shame, which does apply to all elves, but it seems to affect the Sylvan Elves the most, is their lack of mass. You know, it's going to be a real problem when it comes to me really pushing in, because Umbar do have a pretty decent amount of mass to them, but fortunately enough Gondor is here to sort of shore up the line in that respect. If we look over here again, Dale is doing largely the same thing, just setting up a unit, destroying the ram. Now if we look over here, an entire unit of Gondor Citadel archers pretty much died. And this is something that's worth talking about on Dol Guldur, in the fact that if there is no way off a wall, your entire archer unit will be destroyed immediately. And this area of the wall, the only way to get off it is through this doorway over here. He didn't retreat his archers quickly enough, and unfortunately this gap means all of his Citadel archers died, so he only has 6 of them now. It is a bit of a shame, but it has been there since vanilla, so if you've been playing since vanilla you will know about this sort of thing. So there goes the gate. The Dalian Gate. Same sort of situation over here with the Woodland Realms. Honestly, a catapult would be pretty devastating to the Woodland Realms if you got a single decent shot on them, because they have so little in terms of numbers. The Fountain Guard are there, however. Now, this is kind of a bad situation for Gondor, and it's one of the reasons why I would have suggested they should move and retreat, because the Woodland Realms can shoot in to the gate, and that is what they are going to do if you don't. If you just stay stationary against the Woodland Realms, they're going to use their skirmish against you. Meanwhile, if we look over here, obviously I sent up the ram. Well, I didn't actually need the ram in the end because of the assault out of the gate. I was able to just charge in without destroying the gate. Now, obviously, to keep the gate open, I just sacrificed this Corsair Savage unit by charging them into Guards of Osgiliath. But I am going to move up Balagir Halberdiers with their very wicked-looking halberds, almost like bill hooks, really. But yes, the Balagir halberds are pretty damn survivable for what they offer. They've got decent armour. I really like the Balagir halberds, to be honest with you. They're one of my favourite Umbar units simply because of how effective and how efficient they can be. Now obviously they're not going to win one-on-one against Guards of Osgiliath, but one of the things that I can do is disrupt their formation with mass, and the Balagir halberds can certainly do that. So this is good news for me. The attack is progressing there. Again, the Dalians. They haven't moved up yet, so this defence is still rather stationary. And if we look over here, yeah, as expected, the elves are just doing this. And again, this is not something you want to do if you're the defenders. If the enemy are doing this, you can't just stand there and let one of your best units lose their hit points. if they're doing this, just retreat. Retreat your Fountain Guard back to this point on the hill here. You've got Veterans of Osgiliath right here that you can use to counteract the enemy's weaker archers. You know, this is a waste. It's just one of those things. Again, you want to hold them at the gate. I get it, because it's a tighter choke point. But it's just not worth it. You're losing all your hit points from one of your best units that you've deployed. Meanwhile, over here, the assault has begun in earnest. My Corsair Savages are up on the wall. Victory is a distinct possibility, mainly because I am shooting these Woodland Warriors in the back with my Balaguer Archers on the hill. You know, normally Corsair Savages don't have the survivability to beat Woodland Warriors one-on-one, but, you know, they are still an excellent unit to lead the attack with, simply because they will do a lot of damage. There is a bit of a danger that they won't make an attack stick because of how, you know, limited their survivability is, shall we say. Got another unit coming over here. They do have very large axes, so that's very nice. Bringing up a few more units. My Abrazanim Narduzagar are the best shock unit. Well, I suppose I have got the Harbingers of Castamere as my general unit, but I won't be sending them in carelessly. So the Abrazanim I hope to get up onto the walls pretty quickly so I can make my position stick. Obviously my army is going to take the most casualties simply because of the gate I was assaulting. This is going to be the most well defended position, but this also works out well for me. If the Woodland Realms were over here, we probably would have struggled a lot more in the initial part of the assault, but as it was, this was good for us. Balaguer Halberds going toe to toe with the Sylvan Heavy Spearmen, and we can see here that because of the amount of mass that I've deployed here, the initial defense is struggling and the pike line has buckled. You know, one thing that I have noticed is the ability to just crush a pike line just with sheer weight it's a lot easier to do in Reforged, to be honest with you. It's one of the reasons why, to be honest with you, I think Halberds are superior now, simply because they may not offer the same level of punch against cav, but they still will do that job, and yet they will still be much more effective in melee. At least in my experience. You know, it's one of those things where I think maybe the mass of pikes should be increased, at least the mass of the elite pikes, like the Guards of Osgiliath, so that they're harder to just crush through like that. Because it was a decent defensive position that they took up, and I kind of just buckled it immediately. Still, nonetheless, the assault here is kind of stationary down through the gate. Up here though, more Corsair Savages are joining the fight. The Woodland Warriors are, you know, their units are not big enough to withstand an archer volley and the pressure from a unit like the Corsair Savages. Now if we look over here, the Dale Towers are at the walls. Gondor Infantry is a pretty decent choice to make as the defensive line, simply because they are, you know, they're pretty defensive in nature. They're certainly good for stalling enemy on the walls, if not, you know, they probably won't win on the walls, to be honest with you, but they will at least make it a difficult job. If we look over here, the Gondorians charged out, that's another very bold move, considering it's Gondor Infantry they charged out with, a defensive unit, and they are going to get very handily dealt with by Barding Herd, so that's kind of a reckless manoeuvre there. And the enemy cavalry charged out as well. Unfortunately, Barding Herd are present, so again, bit of a waste. The cav really should have been charged out of the gate immediately, and then just sort of put out into the wild around the fortress to make us a little bit more wary about our assault. You know, this is much more like it. This is going to give the pikes the mass to keep their position. More Woodland Warriors. If we look back over here, again, the assault is largely stationary. Some of the Balaguer Halberds are starting to fall by the wayside a little bit, mainly because of these Elder Council firing in. The archers up on the hill over here. Balaguer archers, not just Balaguer archers though, also Dalian marksmen. And the Dalian marksmen I think are better, so we're going to be dealing quite a lot of range damage to the defences around here, although it is worth mentioning that we are trying to single out less armoured units, so primarily it's going to be the Lothlorien units, particularly the Staff Masters. I've sent up another unit of Halberdiers to keep my assault going because, you know, my initial halberds were starting to wane a little bit. If we look over back at the Woodland Realms, not a lot of change. Now, it is worth saying that the Fountain Guard haven't lost any units, essentially, but the hit point loss is the real thing. Like, softening them up for the kill is key here, because the Fountain Guard would be very, very good if they were healthy at dealing with a lot of what we are throwing at them, particularly my army, it must be said. I'm surprised the Fountain Guard weren't over by me. But these spears are going to do very, very poorly against something like Heer E. Lang, so that's worth saying as well. This gap in the wall, a very damaged unit of Guards of Osgiliath now, so again, the Dalian player is taking advantage of a rather reckless assault out of the gates. Like, being aggressive out of the gate is good, but you really need to lead with everything you have and try and break an army, and they haven't really been able to do that. If we look over here, this unit of Gondor infantry is dying. And then if we look up here, he's sending Earls up onto the wall. The Earls will, of course, manage to defeat the Gondor infantry pretty easily. They've managed to hold the Lake Town infantry easily enough because they're far superior to Lake Town infantry, but Earls are going to handily beat Gondor infantry in any situation, really. Still, my Corsair Savages are over here. Unfortunately, a couple of my units have died off since then, and now Galadrim Veteran Warriors are being deployed in melee. Now, this suggests to me that he wasted his ammo with these guys because they are effective versus armour, and AP archers are really something that you should be using to your advantage. The fact that they've been committed to melee already when they were deployed way back there with no real good shots on anything leads me to believe that that's a problem, but this does nonetheless make it much more difficult for me to break through here because they are very effective in melee as well as at range, so it's going to make it a little bit more tricky for me to break through, and I'm taking a lot of casualties at the moment. Again, the Elder Council seem to be firing at my Corsair Savages, and that's another thing that I would really not recommend because javelins are effective against armour, and as you can see from the Corsair Savages attire, armour is not really big on their list of priorities. They wear belts at the most. If we look back over here, got a unit of Belagir Halberds in reserve, a couple of units of Abrazanim, and still got my Blackguards, so I do still have reserves, although I am sending up some Abrazanim through the tower now to engage the Woodland Warriors and the Galadrim Veteran Warriors. They will easily beat the Woodland Warriors, and they should at least do a half-decent amount of damage to the Galadrim as well, even if they won't win. And I do have 2 units of Abrazanim, and there is only 1 unit of Veteran Warriors, so I'm feeling good about my chances of making my wall assault stick despite the losses. You see all the death on the walls. And still, honestly, my attack is starting to pay dividends. The attrition-based warfare is something that my halberds are very, very good at. Something that the elves are not so great at because of their numbers. These halberds are pointing the wrong way. This is where a catapult would have been super, super useful, because I've been in a blob all this time, and one good catapult shot would send most of my units routing when they're tired. So again, a ballista is not really worth it on this map, I don't think. It's good for killing catapults, but the enemy catapults for the attackers are only really a danger when they get into the settlement, and that's going to be very, very late game. And by that point, as the defenders, you should really have a clear advantage in terms of how much damage you have done. Look over here, there are rivermen coming up. Now, that's a strange manoeuvre, sending your javelins up. I guess they are right in the middle of the Earls, and there's no danger that the Earls are going to die, but even so, it's kind of strange to see a javelin unit just in amongst them. Rivermen can be a surprisingly cost-effective javelin, but again, it's a similar story with the Snaga skirmishers. If they're singled out by archers, they'll die very, very quickly, but then again, it's kind of... Right, now this is something that he should have done a while ago, to be honest with you. Put the spearmen in front, let them absorb the archer fire and spear wall, or shield wall I should say, because there's much more of a deflect chance. They will still take some significant losses, but he is now falling back, which he should have done a while ago, to be honest with you. At the very least, the Woodland Realms won't have a lot of archer ammunition left, so that's something that they can take away from this. Now, unfortunately, Dale has managed to spill in. There are Sindar Blade Masters in the settlement. This is really a bit of a disaster for the Gondorians that are over here. So these units are probably going to die off pretty quickly. The Fountain Guard are pretty effective, but not against Sindar Blade Masters. Sindar Blade Masters have no armour at all and very high attack, so out of formation, Fountain Guard is like candy to them. And over here they're flanking around. So the other 2 gates are looking very, very ropey at this point. They're eventually going to fall. It's a matter of how long the Gondorian armour can hold up for. Here's some winged swordsmen that I missed. Pretty effective unit, but you know, they're similar to the Sindar Blade Masters in many ways, only a little bit more reliant on their armour. They do a lot of damage, but they can fall by the wayside pretty quickly if you're not careful. So we are gaining the advantage pretty rapidly in this battle at this point. Over here though, on my gate, they have held me for quite a long time, despite being rather inefficient with what they're choosing to target with their range. Having said that, my attack is still very much alive and well. My Belagir halberds are still fighting. But more importantly, up on this wall, my Abrazanim are going to lose to the Galadrim Veteran Warriors, but this is going to be quite a lot of death on both sides. I'm surprised to see a unit of Gondor infantry up here. Gondor really needs to be holding back the floodgates on the other 2 fronts, because to be honest, I'm kind of stuck in position here. The battle isn't going to be won or lost on my gate, despite the fact it's where most of the fighting has been happening for most of the battle. Over here, the skirmish phase is well and truly ended, though. Now there's a lot of fighting going on over here. The Rivermen are in position. Dale Swordmasters. The Gondorians are completely surrounded after he decided to abandon his shield wall over here, which again is perhaps a kind of questionable decision, but again, I guess he didn't have much choice considering he was going to buckle to the Sindar Blade Masters. Elder Council, it's a disaster over here at this point.
No longer in command of the castle.
A number of things, that reckless charge out, I would have fallen back from this gate sooner as well when I learnt what the Woodland Realms were doing. But there's nothing they can do about it now. They can only make the best of what they have left. The Rivermen, of course, there's still quite a lot of units that Dale have in particular that aren't exactly fantastic. Like Barding Herd and Lake Town Infantry in particular aren't particularly great. Barding Herd are okay, but they're still very vulnerable to skirmishers, of which the Elves and Gondor still have a decent number. Sons of Argonath, and at this point, I would say that sending more and more men over to this front is kind of pointless. It's lost. You really need to be focusing on defending your town centre. This is an excellent defensive position that you can really use to equalise the score, and it doesn't look like they're taking any sort of advantage of that at this point. Veterans of Osgiliath. Meanwhile, over here, I deployed a unit of Castamir's Chosen to really help shore up my attack. These guys are not going to fall anytime soon, and they will defeat the Elder Council in melee pretty damn effectively. I love the look of the Castamir's Chosen as well. Certainly one of the most efficient infantry units, simply because of how tough they are. That's a bit of a key with Umbar. Let's have a little talk about Umbar as a whole. They're certainly very infantry focused. I would say the most infantry focused of all of the evil factions, and this does lend some comparisons to the dwarves, I would say. Not, they're kind of different. There goes the Lothlorien general. They definitely have a more offensive edge to them than the dwarves, I would say. A lot of their units lend themselves more to attack, like obviously the Corsair Savages, but also like the Harbingers of Castamir, the Abrazanim Narduzagar, even stuff like the Abrazanim Nardu Tariq. They are, very effective against armour. It's kind of like, I would say, robust aggression is how I would describe Umbar with their infantry. Even the Warlords of Umbar fall into that category with how effective they can be, even if they don't have the backup. They're very good at being aggressive, and they're very good at managing to survive that aggression. In a lot of cases, particularly with the Orcs, you'll suffer a lot of death when you attack, but with Umbar this isn't really the case because of how strong some of their units really are. And it's one of the reasons why I really like them. They do actually have a very strong case for being my favourite evil faction as it currently stands. It's a close one, It's certainly interesting. The evil faction they most closely resemble is Rune, but Rune, their infantry isn't as good, and their cavalry is probably a bit better. The archers are probably pretty similar, maybe with a very slight advantage to the Umbar, simply because of the Naru Na'aru. Saying some of the names of the Umbar units is a real adventure. The Abrazanim Nardu Tariq, Nardubawib, Narduzagar, the Naru Na'aru. I'm just waiting for a few new Umbar units to see what else they can try and make me say. Meanwhile, the disaster is almost complete over here. The Woodland Realms are sending in more and more of their elite stuff. Dale still has Earls and Swordmasters left alive. At this stage it's looking very poor. The Sons of Argonath, while victory seems certain for the time being, it's going to be a waste putting them here because they're a Royal Guard ready to shoot them in the back. Bit of a disaster all round. On this front they have done exactly what they should do, to be honest with you. They've held, and they've held against the pressure reasonably well. The Ballista is also shooting at these archers, which again is a waste. They've already done their damage at this point. The Ballista should really be retreating up onto this hill and getting ready to shoot us as we assault, but the balance of power is getting more and more in our favour, and at this point the battle is becoming less close. They really need to do something, and a catapult would be able to do that something, but unfortunately that isn't present. I did send up my other unit of Abrazanim Narduzagar, I think. Yes, I did. And they too fell to the Gladron veteran warriors, so it does show how strong they are, but I'm now sending up a unit of Belagir archers that are out of ammo, just to make sure that this assault keeps going. And they won't die too easily. There's also Sindar Blade Masters, so the Woodland Realms has really done a very good job at being being a real presence on the battlefield. They spread themselves out, and if anything, the assault out of the gate could have been on the woodland realms. Certainly with the cavalry, it would have been the most effective choice, I think. Meanwhile, we can see the archers shooting into the backs of this defence over here. Sylvan Heavy Swordsman, which means my Castamir's Chosen is going to be able to break through. DOL Dragon Slayers are getting up onto this hill now as well. It's kind of pouring salt into the wound at this point that we're able to deploy this many units. And, you know, the attackers did have a slight money advantage, but it wasn't huge. I believe it was only 5,000 florins. So, really, the fact that we're winning quite comprehensively at this point shows, I think, less due to our... I don't think we won this fight as such. I think the enemy did lose it a little bit with how they just decided to approach the defence. Now, obviously, losing that unit of Gondor Citadel archers early on was a bit of a shame. You know, it didn't help, certainly, but there were several factors in their defence, several factors in their army compositions, which I think weren't exactly ideal. You know, obviously, first and foremost, the catapult. Second of all, their choice of targets with their ranged units has been very questionable at best, and their choices with regards to attacking out of these the gate and the gap over here, just trying to absorb the elf archer fire over here without any sort of aggression or retreat. Kind of a strange one, to be honest with you. Kind of strange indeed, but nonetheless, they find themselves in this position. It's not impossible that they can win this as well. It's still up for grabs, provided they can really sort of defend this position here, because this is going to be difficult for us to break through. I do have my catapult, but Dol Guldur is rather infamous for the fact that you can get your artillery in position and it won't do what you want. As this ballista is learning at the moment, it's doing the spin dance, which is infuriating when it happens to you, but the closest match I've ever played in 3rd Age was on Dol Guldur, where I was playing as Harad. I was up against, well, the DOL army that was left at the end, and the game crashed. It was a straight duel between a unit of Bardian marksmen that were out of ammo and a unit of Muhad tribesmen that were out of ammo. Both were very tired. We'll never know who would win. But if we look here, the Corsair Blackguards are going to start firing their javelins in here, and this is gonna really show how devastating the Corsair Blackguards can be. They've basically mulched a unit of Sylvan Heavy Spearmen in 2 volleys. There goes another one. Now, Corsair Blackguards, this may look devastatingly overpowered, but they have very, very limited ammo. It's essentially, you can lay waste to one unit and then do a little bit of damage to another, and that's it. They are also pretty good in melee, though. They're not effective against armour. In melee, anyway. At range, obviously, they are with these javelins, but in melee, they are not. But they do have hit points, so they will win. Dalian marksman there. Down here, the Wardens of the White Tower did actually manage to somewhat buckle my assault a little bit. However, my Castamir's Chosen didn't budge. And unfortunately for him, he's now got Sindar Blade Masters to deal with as well. DOL Dragon Slayers are in the background. These Wardens of the White Tower are very, very good, and they will still hold for quite a long time, even against this sort of pressure. But they will not win, so now this is another front in which they are losing the battle. And now the Ballista has unfortunately been caught, and this, at this point, is probably game over. The Ballista was really their key. If they could set it up in a defensive position and use it effectively at the end, perhaps it would have made a difference, but not anymore. Here, Lang charging into Fountain Guard. Fountain Guard should do quite well simply because of their formation, and the Lang don't really have the mass to push through. They are damaging though. Well, I say they don't have the mass to push through. They don't have the mass to push through and make the mass to push through and make it stick anyway. But even so, they still managed to get in amongst the formation, which is not great for the Fountain Guard. They'll take a lot of losses from that. Now we see more and more of the elf units. Look over here. There are still Galadriel Veteran Warriors up here, taking on a couple of units that of the Corsair Savages that are left alive. Still some Abrazanim left alive. No, the Corsair Savage. There's a Dalian Marksman there. I think all of the Belagir Archers died, in fact. There's also a Woodland Warrior. Look at these heroes fighting amongst the death. Unfortunately for them, though, my Corsair Blackguards are coming in to kind of ruin the epic last stand. Now, if we look over here, my Harbingers of Castamir have been committed, so this is going to be the end of the Wardens of the White Tower at this point. They cannot survive against all this pressure. Harbingers of Castamir are a pretty damn scary unit, simply because of how damaging they can be and how tough they are. Definitely not easy to displace, and at this point it should be fairly obvious that we are going to win. So this is kind of a lesson in how not to defend Dol Guldur. It's, you know, they made some mistakes on every front really. They didn't do too much wrong on my front. The worst they did was really target the wrong units with their javelins and their ballista. Really though, you want to bring a catapult as the defenders on Dol Guldur, because the attackers will have to blob at some point. They have no choice, and they will leave themselves very open to a catapult. My army did take the brunt of the casualties. The Woodland Realms and Dale did very, very well in their assaults. Again, charging out of the gates over here against Dale is kind of suicidal, especially for Gondor, considering they're reliant on their armour. And Dale had some very nice armour-piercing units in their archers, and, well, some of their archers anyway, their Royal Guard and their Barding Herd. The Woodland Realms did a very good job at just using their range. You know, they weren't put under any sort of external pressure. Like, if they were going to attack out of the gate, it should have been against the Woodland Realms, because they don't really have the numbers to deal with an aggressive push with cav and infantry. It does leave you a bit exposed, but it would have worked better against the Woodland Realms. Woodland Realms infantry, though, did a very good job at doing what it had to do. Very efficient at dealing with the Gondorians in the end, and then flanking around and helping. They helped on every front, to be honest with you. They even sent some Sindar Blade Masters over to me. Admittedly, after the battle was kind of already won, but nonetheless, this is going to be it. If we get some close-ups now, the Corsair Blackguards. I really do like the Umbar unit models as well. I like again, the Middle Eastern armour style is kind of cool. Very similar to the Serpent Guard, only with a little bit more of a darker colour scheme. A lot of their best units. There are veterans of Osgiliath in melee as well. Very good archery in melee, at least defensively. But, you know, this is kind of bullying at this point, because we still have some archers that have some ammunition left. And it's going to be the end. We look back up here, there are still Sentinels of the Woodland Realms, but they don't have any sort of armour, so they make a juicy target for archers as well. And also we have a catapult in commission, so it really does show that we were able to efficiently deal with their defences, because we didn't have too much of an advantage in terms of money. The enemy did have all of their most scary units. We did have some scary units as well. You know, to be fair, all of the stuff we've got left is our elites. So we threw away the units into melee that we were supposed to early on. But at this point in the battle, it should be much closer than it is on Dol Guldur, and the defenders should be using this hill with a catapult and with javelins to really put the pressure on the attackers. Because the attackers should have the percentage advantage at this point in Dol Guldur, but they should not have the ranged advantage like we do. Look over here, I'm trying to force my way through what's left. And in fact, we can pretty safely. Oh dear, the frame rate tanked there, so let's not do that. Castamir's chosen, Harbingers of Castamir and Corsair Blackguards, so I'm making up the infantry push here. And there's some javelins as well from the Elder Council. Again, the elves really did go for a very quality approach. They certainly didn't have a full stack, which is what makes me wonder why they didn't use their cavalry on the Woodland Realms. A single good charge would have been enough to really put the pressure on their front early on. But here we go, down to the last man, and silver spears. Decent mid-tier spear, at least mid-tier as far as the elves go, but not going to survive this kind of pressure from Umbar's finest. But yes, if you want my... Well, there goes a player admitting defeat. If you want my opinion on Umbar, it's one of my favourite one of my favourite evil factions and elite-focused factions, because they're certainly more based around their quality, even though they do have obviously quite a bit of cannon fodder as an evil faction. The Lothlorien elves also got a bit of an airing. I do want to play as them and talk about them in a little bit more detail, but note for here that their lack of armour and their lack of mass was kind of their downfall here, but that can be used to their advantage if you play them correctly. And again, it's the Gondorian player could have offset that a little bit better than he did. Obviously, I got the most kills out of anyone on the field, which as an attacker is very, very odd. Obviously, the Woodland Realms didn't get many kills, but they did their job very well. The defenders got more kills than both my allies, but both my allies were able to save their men to the point where it didn't really matter. I took the brunt of the casualties and the pressure, but as a result, we ended up winning fairly comfortably. So yeah, that's really the moral of the story. If you're going to defend, you certainly need to communicate, and you certainly need to target the right enemy units with your ranged, particularly your elite ranged, because that can... You're never going to have the money advantage as the defenders, and you're probably never going to have the numbers advantage either, so you need to be very efficient in what you do. Obviously the attackers can afford to be kind of aggressive in these situations, but As long as the attackers all attack together, the onus is really on the defenders to figure out clever ways of poking holes in their approach, and that didn't happen here. In fact, the opposite happened, to be honest with you. They targeted the wrong things. Now, looking at the casualties inflicted, none of my units did a particularly... Well, I suppose the Castemirs Chosen did very well. You know, they were deployed at the time where their line was starting to fall, so... But even so, none of the units did particularly well, but there was a good spread amongst everything. My catapult never got used, so a bit of a waste there. Could have just spent it on another infantry unit. But yes, that was Umbar, that was Dol Guldur. I don't know if Dol Guldur is getting a remaster. Maybe. It might be that this in the background, this higher tier could be used if it was remastered, which would be quite interesting. It would certainly give the defenders more of an advantage, especially then because you could shoot down on these hillocks here, which the attackers often use to pretty devastating effect. It would at least warn against that sort of thing, so that would be pretty neat. But I know that Osgiliath is getting another look to make all the buildings solid, so you can't just shoot through them, and obviously Rivendell is coming soon as well. So this was an interesting one. It wasn't particularly close, but it was at least interesting to behold. As for the next one, I'm not sure. I want to play as the Lothlorien Elves so I can talk about them in a little bit more detail, but I'm not sure. It's going to be a little bit unpredictable with regards to what I'm going to do next, but I do at least hope to get a top 10 done at some point over the weekend, because I want to do the mid-tier infantry, but it is difficult, and I want to have an informed opinion, to be honest with you, so I might ask for a little bit of help on that one, to be honest with you. So I hope to see you for that, and I hope you enjoyed this one.